120 miles off of the west coast of Costa Rica, there exists an island with a rich history that dates back to long before that of its 20th century exploitation. This island is known as Isla Nublar, the home of the original Jurassic Park and its newer incarnation, Jurassic World. Discovered in 1525 by Spanish navigator Diego Fernandez, the find would soon be named Cloud Island by Nicolas de Huelva, who was a cartographer on the Spanish carrack, La Estrella. Nublar was given this name because of the black smoke that had begun to rise at the north peak of its layout. This was the earliest documentation of Mount Ceibo's volcanic activity. Soon after the island was discovered, 5 more were found 87 miles east of Fernandez's initial find. This archipelago would later be named Las Cinco Muertes, or the 5 deaths as we've come to know them. Now, upon exploring Nublar, the Spaniards would learn of the existence of a local indigenous tribe known as the Bribri. These natives refer to their island as Guasi, roughly translated to the house beyond water, and they called themselves Tunsi, or watermen. Living alongside the Bribri were native animals such as the 2-foot-tall Nublar tufted deer and the rarely seen brown pelican, who would often stop along the coast to rest from their long migrations. These animals would later share their home with much bigger, and in some cases, threatening neighbors. 4 centuries of history displaced many of the local inhabitants, and in 1987, those few who remained were settled off island by a certain genetics company. You see, in 1985, John Hammond had decided to cancel his plans for Jurassic Park San Diego, and instead moved his construction teams to Isla Nublar after he leased the island from the Costa Rican government. This created conflict and turmoil for the indigenous people of Cloud Island, and resulted in an unfortunate slaughter that took place there in the 80s. It is said that some locals chose to rebel against the mercenaries who went in to relocate the Bribri. One individual by the name of Nima Cruz recalls the events being unnecessarily harsh and personally tragic. She insists that one man in particular named Oscar Morales murdered some of the indigenous people who tried to fight back. Her accusations have never been denied by the man in question, and he actually states that he felt extreme remorse for committing those terrible acts of violence, and so to remind himself of those who were killed by his hand, Morales dedicated a long series of tattoos inked onto his left arm, the skulls symbolizing the enemies whom he had to kill. In 1987, the last of the Bribri were resettled off island, and Jurassic Park would begin to take shape. InGen harnessed the power of Mount Ceibo, the volcano whom the Spanish cartographer had named Cloud Island after, and in doing so, brought forth a great deal of power and control to the vast jungles of the island. The geothermal power plant was built in the northern regions, and the visitor center as well as the rest of the park itself would soon follow suit in the coming months. During this time, cloned dinosaurs would begin to be shipped in from Isla Sorna, and not too long after their delivery was carried out, a violent hurricane and unforeseen act of industrial espionage would plunge Nublar into total chaos, setting the dinosaurs free to terrorize the men and women who had found themselves trapped on the lands of the relocated people who had lived there for thousands of years. What the company and its investors had called discovery would later be known everywhere as nothing but the rape of the natural world. Alright guys, that is the complete history of Isla Nublar, all the way up to the events of the original Jurassic Park. The information that was used to piece this video together was gathered from the Masrani Global website for the most part, with only the names of Nima Cruz and Oscar Morales coming from 2011's Jurassic Park the game. These particular events are actually said to line up completely with the wider movie canon and can be traced back to Simon Masrani himself. Link will be in the description. So what do you all think about InGen's dark past? Did you know about any of this, or is all of this stuff new to your personal Jurassic experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. In the very first Jurassic Park, Robert Muldoon suggests that he and the remaining survivors holed up in the control room utilize something called the lysine contingency. Immediately after, Ray Arnold gives us the rundown on what exactly this is.
The lysine contingency is intended to prevent the spread of the animals in case they ever get off the island. Dr. Wu inserted a gene that creates a single faulty enzyme in protein metabolism. The animals can't manufacture the amino acid lysine. Unless they're completely supplied with lysine by us, they slip into a coma and die.
Now, with Dr. Henry Wu putting this failsafe into the genetics of all of the animals, it's left many audience members questioning just how exactly all of these dinosaurs on the island managed to survive for so many years after the fall of the first Jurassic Park. And believe it or not, there's actually more than one answer. Now, of course, there is an explanation given by Dr. Sarah Harding in the sequel film, The Lost World, in which she describes the eating habits of InGen's clones. The herbivores eat lysine-enriched plant matter on Site B and are in turn eaten themselves by the carnivores. This is what allows them to survive long after Hurricane Clarissa wiped out the company's facilities. But that is an explanation given to Isla Sorna, the second island in the franchise continuity. Isla Nublar is never given an on-screen film explanation itself. Of course, it isn't too big of a stretch to assume that the dinosaurs fell into the same kind of behavior that their siblings went through on the sister island. But it's also true that we don't really get any sort of solid explanation in any of the further films. At this point in time, I think it would be important to actually examine what the lysine contingency really is. So Dr. Henry Wu made sure that the dinosaurs would be incapable of producing an amino acid known as lysine. This singular amino acid would only be administered by Jurassic Park personnel in order to prevent the dinosaurs from causing any harm if they ever got off of the island. Unfortunately for Dr. Wu and all of the theme park staff, this is an incredibly bad idea. Being one of the ideas that was carried over from Michael Crichton's novel, the lysine contingency was used to further establish just how flawed the systems really were at Jurassic Park. In reality, barely any animal imaginable can actually produce lysine by themselves. The way in which all creatures, including human beings, would survive if they were dependent on lysine is by eating a lysine-enriched diet. Of course, we get confirmation of this happening in The Lost World, but in none of the other sequels is it ever brought up again, and that's mainly because it's an extremely flawed failsafe. This further illustrates just how little knowledge Henry Wu had when designing these ancient animals. What good is your kill switch if it can easily be remedied by eating something that shuts it down? However, even if we ignore the fact that the dinosaurs could have easily eaten lysine-enriched foods on Nublar, we'd have to consider yet another explanation that was given in a later release. In 2011's Jurassic Park the Game, Dr. Laura Sorkin actually contaminates the entire Nublar water supply with a good healthy dose of lysine.
I guess we've got a lot of extra lysine now that the parasaurs don't need the external supply.
Yeah, about that. It's not just the parasaurs. We added the antidote to the main water supply.
That'll reach every dinosaur in the park. You're insane! Denying the dinosaurs lysine was the only safety mechanism we had to keep them out of the global ecosystem.
The remote possibility that a dinosaur could make it to the mainland is far outweighed by our responsibility to treat these animals humanely. They're here because of us.
I don't want to see these animals die. I really don't. But we all agreed to the lysine contingency. It was a prerequisite to working here.
For you, maybe. But you have to remember, Jerry, I was here before there even was a lysine contingency. Henry Wu came up with the lysine contingency, and let's not mince words, it's a kill switch, as part of his bid for the top spot. I couldn't stop it, but I never agreed to it, not even for a second.
You're still here?
So instead of having to eat certain types of foods, every creature imaginable, even the carnivores, could simply drink the water and get their amino acids that way. Now, while it's true that we don't know for certain whether or not this happened in the official film canon or not, we can assume that had they not done this, they could have simply eaten the lysine-enriched foods like they did in The Lost World and in real life and survived that way, making Dr. Wu's lysine contingency utterly useless. The novel goes into this exact genetic alteration further by Martin Gutierrez asserting that the migrating raptors that left Nublar have simply adapted by eating lysine-enriched crops and chickens in order to survive. Meaning, if any dinosaur cloned with this failsafe in mind got off of the island, they would easily be able to survive without any major problems at all. It was simply a very bad design flaw that gave us more insight into why Jurassic Park was a terrible idea. And as far as we currently know, no dinosaur has ever slipped into a coma because of the lysine contingency and died. Anyways, those are all of the explanations given to us as to why the dinosaurs survived in The Lost World, Jurassic Park the Game, and the original Michael Crichton novel. Dr. Henry Wu wasn't exactly the best at making these kind of things. Now, I'd like to hear all of your thoughts on the lysine contingency. Do you think it will ever come up again in the series? And if so, how? I think it would be kind of difficult to implicate again now that it's been rendered kind of useless. I wanted to go over some details surrounding the original Jurassic Park. If we go over the layout of Isla Nublar way back in 1993, we can get a relatively accurate depiction of what John Hammond's initial vision really was. During the events of the first movie, Dr. Hammond had quite a lot of paddocks set up for new dinosaurs, and some of those dinosaurs were indeed in the park itself during the on-site inspection that we all know went horribly wrong. Others were supposed to have been added a little while after the grand opening was going to take place. So in this video, I wanted to go over the list of animals that he was going to exhibit in Jurassic Park. The information that I'm going to be citing is coming from 4 sources. First and foremost, the Jurassic Park brochure that can be seen on screen in the first movie. Second, the list of animals recorded on the DPG website. Third, the embryo tanks that we saw Nedry visit during the midpoint of the film. And lastly, the creatures that we observe in the 2011 video game by Telltale. Now, if we just watch the first movie and don't take anything else into consideration, we can confirm that at least 7 dinosaurs were going to be planned for the theme park. These are, in order of appearance, Brachiosaurus, Parasaurolophus, Velociraptor, Dilophosaurus, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Triceratops, and Gallimimus. But the fun doesn't just stop there, because there were of course other dinosaur pins that we can look at if we check out the brochure that Grant uses to get back to the visitor center. And those other dinosaurs include the following: Baryonyx, Metriacanthosaurus, Segisaurus, Proceratosaurus, and Herrerasaurus. Now, the Procerato and the Metria are actually interesting to note because we also get to see them make appearances as embryos in the movie during the heist scene. So with paddocks being built on the island and a small name cameo being in the first film, it's kind of hard to question whether or not they would have been intended for Jurassic Park. InGen definitely had plans for them. And speaking of the DNA that we see in the embryo storage room, there are actually a few other species we need to take note of as well. Stegosaurus is an animal that we don't see on the brochure and also don't get to see in the first movie, but it would pop up walking around on Isla Sorna in the Lost World. This means that Stegosaurus was more than likely going to be pushed out to park guests during a second or third wave of new animals that would have been brought over once Jurassic Park was supposed to begin expansion. Or it may not have even been intended for the Nublar Resort. Keep in mind, we also see that other places like Jurassic Park Europe were going to be planned to open as well. Now, apart from the Stegosaurus, other embryos are listed by the DPG for the Corythosaurus and Compsognathus. However, these dinosaurs don't show up until later in future installments like the Stego. And with that out of the way, we really need to discuss some of the species that show up in the 2011 Jurassic Park Telltale game. Because in all honesty, they happen to be the ones with quite a lot of complexity woven into their backstories. Now, while not everything within this adventure game can be taken at face value, some stuff does appear in hard canon seen in newer movies, with Mount Sibo being the main example. So while we don't have any real confirmation of these creatures ever being intended for exhibition in the first movie, we should still acknowledge the information in the game as something that could be important at some later date. Of course, I'm talking about the Troodons and Tylosaurus that were introduced to in the video game. The first of which was actually said to have been taken off of InGen's list by request of John Hammond himself after they found out how dangerous the Troodons would be in the park. So if this actually came to fruition, then yeah, we shouldn't see any acknowledgement of it in any park brochure or embryo storage whatsoever. The second animal is a bit trickier to talk about, because while it's made explicitly clear that the Tylosaurus was a mosasaur that was being kept secret in the company, there was still an entire marine exhibit that got built on the island to accompany the gigantic beast. Whether or not it was supposed to be intended for Phase 2 as far as hard film canon goes, I don't really know right now, but its appearance in the game shouldn't be taken lightly. Finally, the appearance of the Jurassic Park 3 Pteranodons in the 2011 game happened to be the weirdest addition in my personal opinion, because this is the variant of the species that we're led to believe was trapped inside of the aviary on Site B, all the way up until Amanda Kirby accidentally let them out in the third film. So maybe that's a part of the game that just makes no sense. However, one interesting thing to say about Pteranodons in Jurassic Park is while they aren't shown in the brochure or in any of the embryo storage units, there actually is evidence in the first movie that suggests that they were going to be incorporated into Nublar at some future point. During the lunch scene, we get to see concept art of an aviary displayed on one of the projectors behind Hammond in Jurassic Park. So there actually is something of a hint towards their inclusion being planned as far back as 1993. It's hard to say what would have been there when the park officially opened, but as far as bona fide evidence goes, we have 12 species on the brochure that were going to be in the park, as well as some unconfirmed appearances from the 2011 Telltale game. Dinosaurs like the Stegosaurus could have been planned for the Nublar Resort, but we also have to remember that originally, Hammond had planned to open up other resorts like Jurassic Park Europe as well, so who knows where all of the dinosaurs on Sorna would have eventually ended up. Anyways guys, what are your thoughts on the dinosaur choices InGen made for the Nublar Resort? And what kind of dinosaurs do you think the other resorts would have had? Do you think that all of the animals on Site B would have eventually been incorporated into Jurassic Park? Or do you think that they would have divvied them up amongst the other resorts around the world? Whatever your thoughts and opinions may be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Now, at the start of this particular article by Ross S., we learned that Jurassic Park itself was heavily investigated after the events of the first movie, but the family's victims were apparently given hush money and all information surrounding the park remained hidden. It wasn't until a famous television interview with Dr. Ian Malcolm in 1995 that people started to talk about the incident seriously. At this point in the timeline, Malcolm disclosed sensitive information on InGen to the entire world and told the truth about what actually happened on Isla Nublar 2 years ago. Unfortunately, InGen made it their mission to discredit Malcolm's claims, and successfully managed to make Ian Malcolm a laughingstock. The man that was principally behind this happened to be Peter Ludlow, Hammond's nephew and soon-to-be CEO of InGen. You see, Ludlow was armed with years of experience in litigation, and used a combination of legal loopholes, misinformation, and outright bribes in order to maintain the company's pristine image. And out of a desire to keep its own reputation safe from the public, the government of Costa Rica actually aided Ludlow in covering up John Hammond's dinosaur theme park. Ultimately, all of this worked. Everyone dismissed the existence of Jurassic Park as a hoax, and the public moved on. However, a hacker has recently managed to acquire sensitive InGen documents that were passed around the company around the time of these events, and this evidence proves to be quite damning to say the least. Inside of the document, which is dated around 1996, you'll find that the company had figured out who was behind the park's sabotage and how exactly the man did it. Dennis Nedry, whose name is redacted from the entire memo, is said to have shut down the system with a computer virus known as White Rabbit Object, which resulted in a loss of power to the security systems and even the secondary backup generator. This secondary generator was previously only heard of from the novel, so seeing it in the film lore is even more interesting to me. Now, in the next section, we learn that the insulated pipes that carried liquid nitrogen to the embryo storage units were severed in the sabotage. This caused a considerable rise in temperature and a loss of all viable embryos at the Nublar Resort. There was also extensive water damage from a burst pipe around the visitor center that caused considerable damage to the embryo storage units. One of the units buckled under the stress and its embryos were washed away. It's believed that minor tectonic activity could have been the perpetrator. Now, the exact motive for Nedry's action was still unknown. However, the park veterinarian is said to have made a statement on his belief that the sabotage may have been in an effort to smuggle the embryos to a rival genetics company. In case you didn't know, this actually points straight to Jurassic Park the game's protagonist Jerry Harding as having been involved in the events of that particular game, propping up its placement in the timeline as pretty relevant. After this, we learn that InGen eventually did find the body of Dennis Nedry during the 1994 cleanup. The cause of death has, however, been blacked out. Now, the next couple of pages in the document are extremely crucial to knowing InGen's list and give us a complete understanding as to what the company was up to. Here, we can see which of their animals survived as well as where they happen to live. Brachiosaurus, Parasaurolophus, Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus rex, Gallimimus, and Dilophosaurus are confirmed to having lived on both Nublar and Sorna, while Baryonyx and Stegosaurus were only existing on Sorna alone. Compies were never supposed to be on Nublar, but it looks like some of the Sorna tribes made their way to Nublar by boat. And while velociraptors were indeed present on Site B, the bodies of small raptors were found post the Jurassic Park incident of '93. And finally, the information on the missing dinosaurs that we've all been waiting for. Those names on the embryonic chambers of the first park are explained to us in full. Corythosaurus, The dinosaur that an InGen hunter in the Lost World can be seen carrying information on was actually an embryo in the first park. They had with them 97% of its DNA, but all viable embryos of the animal were destroyed in the sabotage. Metriacanthosaurus had 71% of its DNA inside of Jurassic Park during the incident, and unfortunately, they too were destroyed. 48% of Sagisaurus DNA was destroyed on Nublar as well. Interestingly, the document also states that 4 Herrerasaurs were actually alive on the island during these events, but all were found dead in the '94 cleanup. Again, this makes the events of Jurassic Park the game fairly significant. Now, luckily enough, InGen happened to get all of the DNA of these guys back during the evacuation of Site B, and that includes the already cloned baryonyx. They didn't really lose any of their animals except for one in particular. Sadly, it seems that the Proceratosaurus DNA was completely lost during the hurricane on Site B and the incident at Jurassic Park. Because of this, the animal's status was changed to terminated until further DNA could be found. At the end of this document, we get information on the very important Operation Clean Sweep being called off, and information on John Hammond's wishes for all of their production facilities to be kept from any press releases at this time. If you don't know what Operation Clean Sweep was, don't worry, I'll be doing a whole video on that in the future. In my opinion, this article was amazing. This is exactly the kind of information that I've been waiting for someone to put out there for a long time, and I'm incredibly happy to see that they finally did. That closes up nearly every loophole there used to be in the lore and makes things incredibly tight in nearly all areas. Jurassic Park the game raises some eyebrows, but for the most part it's actually been adopted into the lore in a very respectful way. This was probably the coolest lore dump I've ever seen released. Now, those are all just my thoughts though, and I'm curious to hear what all of your opinions are. How do you guys feel about all of this information from the DPG? And do you think we'll ever get to see a Sagisaurus or Proceratosaurus in a future movie? Let me know in the comments down below, guys. I really hope we do. The Jurassic Park franchise is no stranger to having unique and terrifying dinosaurs within its respective films. The most notable of, in my opinion at least, is by far the Dilophosaurus from the first movie. What presents itself as nothing more than a playful and curious little creature that's interested in what you're doing quickly changes into a rattling venom spitter whose snarl fueled my nightmares as a kid. The Dilophosaur is undoubtedly the creepiest dinosaur in the Jurassic Park film series, but I don't think it's honestly the creepiest one in the entire franchise. No, that award goes directly to the Troodons. Now, if you haven't played Jurassic Park the game, you may not know exactly what a Troodon is, or how it's even a part of the wider story, but believe it or not, even its quiet and lesser known beginnings help build the creature up into what makes it so creepy in the first place. Originally created as an attraction for Jurassic Park, these dinosaurs caused several accidents and brought about terrible chaos, before John Hammond himself deemed the Troodons as a threat to his vision of the park, and ordered Laura Sorkin, one of his geneticists, to destroy all of them along with all records of their creation. Dr. Sorkin, the bleeding heart animal rights advocate from yesteryear, instead opted to hold the creatures in quarantine pens where she believed they'd be safe, which ultimately led to the animal's escape. Troodons are vicious, intelligent little dinosaurs that coordinate their attacks in small packs. They are nocturnal, choosing to only hunt at night, however move in numbers so great and overbearing that most creatures on the island choose to flee from them rather than fight, including the aforementioned Dilophosaurs and even the Velociraptors. Their DNA sequences were also filled in with the genetic code of a frog, just like all of the other dinosaurs, meaning they too were capable of changing sex and breeding, and Troodon reproduction is dark. It's violent, insect-like, and unapologetically crude, all things that make it the frightening event that it is. Towards the end of this somewhat canon video game, one of the InGen extraction members is found by Jerry Harding and the other survivors. Billy Yoder, another member of the same team, confirms this man's identity to be Decaf, one of his friends. Decaf, while still alive in the technical sense, had been rendered brain dead by the Troodon's venom, and his body was used as the catalyst for the creature's creation of a heavy nest. You see, Troodons tend to bite their victims and inject their hallucinatory venom in order to assist in their hunting party. This venom quickly leads to seizures and other convulsions before the eventual paralysis and brain death. Decaf's body had been chosen by these creatures as the perfect mound in which they could lay their eggs. It's presumed that they do this because of the heat source for the tiny hatchlings, as well as an ample amount of food that the babies could use once they begin to hatch, eating their way out of the victim in a manner similar to that of spider wasp species. Alone, Troodons are deadly enough with just their bite, but a closer examination of their feet reveals an additional weapon that can be useful for hectic encounters. The Troodon is also equipped with a sickle-shaped claw on one of its toes, eerily similar to that of their Anteropus neighbors. These creatures could slice and dice you just as easily as they could inject their saliva into your bloodstream. Now, it's important to note that this animal is not the greatest example of its prehistoric ancestor. In fact, the name Troodon pectinodon was given to the animal only after they watched it hatch in the nursery. Jurassic Park scientists had no idea what the creature was until this event occurred. Being the only parasitic creature bred on the islands, this animal is unquestionably spooky and somewhat alien in design. Its snarls and roars are similar to that of a leopard or cougar, while also possessing the eerie hiss of a crocodilian. When its bulbous white eyes light up in the dense jungles of Nublar at night, every animal and human on the island should watch themselves. It's unknown of what exactly happened to the animals after the company cleanup of 1994, but due to the Troodons being erased and wiped clean off of InGen's list, no one really knows where they may be today. What was once designed to be a happy theme park attraction has now become just a relic of the 90s past, maybe lost forever in the wilds of that Costa Rican island. Now, when it comes to dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park franchise, there's quite a lot of different species to talk about. Whether they be fan favorites that appear in every entry, like the Velociraptor or T-Rex, or even some of the more obscure creatures like the Ceratosaurus or the Dilos, the Jurassic franchise has always offered up a good variety of animals to talk about. But then you've got some other creatures that are also pretty important to Jurassic Park. These are some of the more unique and rare species that were created by man to act as business assets for the genetics company. Of course, I'm talking about the hybrids. Now, whether they be from 1994 during the creations of Dr. Gustavus, or from someone from 2015 like Dr. Wu with the Indominus Rex, Jurassic has played around with the hybrid dinosaur idea for nearly its entire existence. This brings us to the subject and sciences that will make up today's video, because the dinosaur that we're talking about from the Jurassic Park Telltale story could lend itself to a good conversation on paleontology and its usage in the overall franchise, as well as hybrid dinosaurs' involvement in it as well. This game took place in the original theme park, and in its story, a creepy dinosaur that was erased from InGen's list would get cloned and released onto the island during Biosyn's second attempt to retrieve dinosaur embryos. These new dinosaurs are known by most fans as simply the Troodons, which does indeed have a place in real-life paleontological history. Or at least it used to, but hey, that's a discussion for a whole other video. Now, what most people don't know is that the full name of these dinosaurs reveals much more about their backstory than what many people currently talk about. And that full name is Troodon pectinodon, which, if you're unfamiliar with dinosaur naming, is actually two separate animals combined. Now, the relationships between a Troodon and the pectinodon as a species has crossed over quite a bit during many scientists' paleontological research, but after a long process of studying them had been done, most people agreed that Pectinodon bakiri, which is known only from its teeth by the way, was far different enough to get labeled as its own specific creature. Meanwhile, the animal known as Troodon formosus had been going through an identity crisis itself. Needless to say, neither of these animals holds the name Troodon pectinodon. That doesn't exist in real life. And that's because this was a totally new animal created for use in Jurassic Park, the game. But why exactly did they do that? What was the point of mixing two different dinosaur species together in order to create a brand new animal for use in the theme park? Well, before we begin any speculation, we really need to check out what the game's field guide material says on the subject. This is the only for sure way to really get a good idea on what's going on here. In Dr. Laura Sorkin's journals, she says that they didn't know what the animal would be until it hatched. Yet it somehow confirmed her suspicions that it would be a Troodon pectinodon specifically. Now, if the people working at Jurassic Park didn't know what the animal would be until it hatched, I think that kind of rules out any direct manipulation of the genome in order to create their own creature. However, this still raises a pretty big question that is yet to be addressed. Why did they combine the names of two different dinosaurs in order to create a new species? Well, from what I can tell, it looks like they simply made a dinosaur up from scratch for use in the game. I guess they couldn't really decide on what to do with the real-life animal known as Troodon, so they threw in the name Pectinodon for good measure. It should be noted that this game's rendition of the Troodon is a far cry from what we know the animal to look like in paleontology, and the creative liberties that have been taken to its design are more along the lines of what they did to the Dilophosaurus in the first movie. So, is this dinosaur a hybrid? Well, technically speaking, from our point of view in the real world, yes. But I don't think that was really the intention when they were developing the game. Although I could definitely see that being called into question since they literally put two dinosaurs' names together and the fact that the final design looks nothing like the real animal. Bottom line, what we have here is a unique example of paleontology and biotech blending together in the franchise to create an alien creature that's status as hybrid or real dinosaur could be called into question at any given point in time. So out of curiosity, what do all of you guys think about this kind of bizarre looking animal? Most people seem to be fine with the idea that it's just how the InGen version of the dinosaurs look, but I don't think everybody knows about all of these inconsistencies with the animal in the fossil record, which is more than usual to say the least. This is a creature that I could see classified as either a hybrid or a full-fledged fictional species, depending on who you talk to in the fandom. That's why I want to give the conversation to all of you and see what you have to say about it. Now, whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be on the Troodon, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. In Jurassic Park the game, we're introduced to something known only as the Marine Facility, which was a portion of Isla Nublar's original park that was under construction during the events of the first movie. Its main attraction was going to be an underwater exhibit where visitors could go down and get a glimpse at the massive Tylosaurus that Henry Wu had bred. This Tylosaurus was later released and could even have made it all the way out of its enclosure and into the open oceans outside of the island. This possibility is even discussed amongst the characters that have made their way down to the enclosure. But now, after our protagonists make it out of the exhibit, we never hear or see the creature ever again. So what exactly happened to it? Did it manage to make its way out into the open ocean, and if so, where did it go? Why haven't we seen it since? These are the questions that I'd love to discuss in today's video.
Laura, there are other options here. Holding us against our will to save the dinosaurs is only one poorly thought out solution. You're smarter than that, Laura.
I know, Jerry. I know what I'm doing. I clearly expressed the consequences of threatening this island. I scored a line in the sand that has been ignored and trampled over by InGen, by the government, and now I exercise my resolve.
Laura?
I'm going to free the Mosasaur.
Are you mad? A land dinosaur paddling to the mainland is one thing, but you're talking about releasing an apex predator into over 70% of the global ecosystem.
It's only one. It can be recaptured.
Before it eats the last of the humpbacks?
Oh, don't be dramatic.
Laura, don't.
Jurassic Park the game makes it very clear that if this giant marine predator were to ever get out, it would be catastrophic for the ocean's ecosystems. Dr. Laura Sorkin does actually manage to free the animal, but instead of escaping, it chooses to eat her instead. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the real answer to this question can only be found if we answer another. Is the Tylosaurus and its escape in Jurassic Park the game canon to the larger film universe? And the answer to that question isn't given in any sort of related material that I have ever been able to find. As it currently stands, the Tylosaurus has not been brought up in any sort of media outside of Jurassic Park the game. But then again, that's exactly how it should be. You see, in this game's story, there's actually evidence that supports the idea that many in the company were kept out of the loop about this animal's creation. Similarly to the Troodons, the Tylosaurus is mentioned as being a secret attraction, and Dr. Lord Sorkin didn't even know about this one. We know that it's not uncommon for InGen to keep secrets from the general public, seeing as both the Ceratosaurus and Spinosaurus weren't on their publicly released list of cloned animals. So it is very possible that this could be another cryptic example of them hiding something. However, we still need to acknowledge the fact that not everything in Jurassic Park the game is canon to the films. In fact, if we're being honest, it never really has been concrete canon in the grand scheme of things, as Jerry's missing mustache should be the first to tell you. That being said, there are some things in that game that are absolutely true to the wider universe. Isla Nublar's volcano being named Mount Sibo, and Jerry Harding's suspicion of Dennis Nedry stealing company embryos being good, solid examples. So while there isn't any empirical evidence to support the idea that the Tylosaurus escaped, there also isn't any case that can be built against it happening. If the animal was indeed cloned by Dr. Henry Wu, and if it did actually get freed by Laura Sorkin, I have confidence that it would probably make its way out into the open oceans. After running low on food or simply becoming curious of the outside world, I think the reptile would definitely choose to wander off after the events of the game. And if this proves to be what did factually happen, then the animal would become the apex predator that Jerry Harding said it was. A massive Tylosaurus feeding on whales, sharks, and other large marine life forms could even go unnoticed if it kept away from any prying eyes. And this is 1993 we're talking about, so I'm not too sure anyone would be on the lookout for a giant sea monster on the loose pre-Fallen Kingdom. In reality though, the only way we're ever going to know if that creature got away is if the Tylosaurus comes up again in future Jurassic media. And I think the possibilities for that happening are actually rather slim. You could always write around it, and I'm sure that its inclusion in the wider universe, and even its undetected survival, could become a really cool plot point of some new story. But as of right now, I think it's safe to say that no one really knows the answer to this question. As it currently stands, Dr. Wu made it publicly known in the year 2000 that the method he used to extract Mosasaurus DNA was probably the only way they'd ever be able to bring back marine life. So the cards are stacked heavily against the 1993 Tylosaurus in my opinion. That doesn't mean that I don't want to see it come back though, because I think it could make for a really awesome surprise in the future. But what all of you guys think? What happened to InGen's Tylosaurus after the events of Jurassic Park? And would you like to see it make any future appearances? Whatever your thoughts may be, I'd love to hear about them in the comments down below. In 1993, John Hammond invited a special group of individuals to come visit his exotic island. He intended the visit to end in unwavering support for the attraction he'd been building for years. This Jurassic Park came complete with living clones of velociraptors, triceratops, and a massive tyrannosaur amongst others, all animals that were being prepped for their reveal to the public in good time. The same cannot be said for every creature Dr. Henry Wu bred. Most fans are familiar with the idea of InGen having deleted dinosaurs from their publicly released list of cloned animals. Examples like the illegally created Spinosaurus of 1999 and the covered-up Troodons from the early 90s are probably the most well-known, while the Devil of the Deep is more than likely the least. Jurassic World provided us with a massive mosasaur that the park kept in a beautiful lagoon. This animal's reveal marked the first time the company came out to publicly showcase an aquatic creation. However, it was not the first sea-dwelling animal that Dr. Wu had created. Not too long after the events of the first Jurassic Park film, a group of stranded individuals made their way to a secret part of Nublar's facilities. This section of Jurassic Park was intended to open during Phase 2 of Hammond's original schedule, and it would include a giant marine reptile as its main attraction, a creature given the name of Tylosaurus. Now, Hammond kept this animal's creation as well as the exhibit it was to be featured in hidden from most employees who were already working on the island. Dr. Laura Sorkin, one of Jurassic Park's geneticists, eventually found out about all of this after Hammond cut half of her funding in 1992 for what the billionaire described as urgent needs. Sorkin learned that a mosasaur was being bred on the island but had no idea what genus it was. This is more than likely due to the odd physical appearance of InGen's Tylosaurus. This clone had a row of spikes running down its back and a skull nearly as short as other mosasaurs like Platycarpus, giving it a most unique and intriguing design. During the events of Jurassic Park the game, Sorkin would attempt to free the Tylosaurus after mercenary Billy Yoder called in an airstrike on the island. Her efforts to save the marine reptile ironically led to her being killed and eaten by the very animal she sought to help. It's from here that we see how powerful and deadly the creature can really be. The animal would go on to destroy most of its enclosure while hunting Jerry Harding and the others, its massive bulk breaking pipes and crushing rocks that adorned its habitat. At one point during our protagonist's escape, the animal can even be seen bending steel in its jaws. Unfortunately, the end of this perilous chase would result in the, so far, final appearance of this particular creature in the series. As of now, we have had absolutely no further information on InGen's Tylosaurus, and have no evidence supporting its current status or whereabouts. Due to the enclosure being open, it's extremely possible for the reptile to have made its way out of the exhibit and into open waters, but we've yet to find any confirmation on whether or not this happened. Personally, I think the creature had to have migrated out further once its food supply became depleted, and I find it likely that it's been dining on sea creatures for these past several years. But again, none of this has ever been confirmed. The Devil of the Deep was kept off of InGen's list due to secrecy, and no one knows whether or not the animal is currently alive or dead in the franchise's canon, making this clone by far the most mysterious creature in the Jurassic Park franchise to date. In Jurassic World, we were reintroduced to the original Tyrannosaurus Rex that broke out on Isla Nublar way back in 1993. For over a decade, she ruled Cloud Island unchallenged and had dominion over every inch of the old Jurassic Park facilities that failed so horribly during the events of the first movie. But in the early 2000s, her reign would come to a decisive end. Now, construction for the second iteration of Hammond's theme park would begin on Nublar several years after the first Jurassic Park incident took place. Masrani Global went out of their way to provide the safest and most secure theme park attraction they could when going over the island and bringing its animals back into their cages. Of course, the most difficult animal that they'd have to deal with would be the 7-ton Tyrannosaur that had lived there for several years. Nevertheless, the job had to be done, and Jurassic World needed to have this animal safely captured and brought into a new paddock so that construction could continue on the island as soon as humanly possible. Enter Vic Hoskins, known predominantly for his role as the main antagonist of the fourth film. Now, this man's relationship with Simon Masrani, who in fact owned Jurassic World, goes back further in the canon than what I think most people seem to know. After the escape of the Site B Pteranodons from Jurassic Park 3, all individual pterosaurs were quickly located in Canada, where they'd all traveled to begin a new nesting ground. Fortunately for the country's locals, Hoskins and his elite team of specialized men had a major part in the Pteranodon cleanup that took place in 2001. And due to the professionalism Hoskins' team displayed during these events, the man was hired by Simon Masrani himself in order to help redevelop InGen's security division. At the time of Jurassic World's construction, their main objective was to provide safety to all of the construction workers who were busy building the Jurassic World facilities on the island. This meant that one of their first missions involved capturing a certain large carnivore that needed to be taken care of soon. Now, the Tyrannosaurus Rex from Jurassic Park had enjoyed a life of relatively little fear on the island since John Hammond and company left 9 years earlier. However, it did not actually have the most peaceful or ideal life since its handlers had gone. In the time since Jurassic Park had fallen, the Rex from the first park had been overcome with a pretty severe illness that it was unable to shake. This ailment is known as ragged tooth, and it was the result of one of the creature's large teeth being broken off inside of its skull. Infection quickly spread throughout the carnivore's gum line, which led to the breakdown of much of the soft tissue surrounding its jaws. This made the dinosaur's hunts rather difficult on the island, and while it managed to kill many creatures on Nublar, it began to suffer from a slight case of malnutrition for not being able to eat as much as it was supposed to. And one fateful day on Isla Nublar in 2002, Vic Hoskins and the same team that had cleaned up the Pteranodon breakout in Canada went deep into the Tyrannosaurus territory and successfully tranquilized the carnivore before moving it back into the safety of a large theme park paddock. Evidence for Rexy's recapture can be found in a log made by Vic Hoskins himself, where he states that he's impressed with the professionalism his team displayed on the island. Staring down a 7-ton predator is no easy task, and he wanted his men to make sure that each and every one of them acknowledged that. Now, what I find so interesting about this particular capture is that the T-Rex was actually being attacked while it was at a pretty weakened state. It really makes you wonder, how would that event have played out if she was at the top of her game on the same day, all those years ago. Regardless of that outcome, she was indeed tranquilized and put in a new enclosure for Jurassic World. Simon Masrani was the son of illustrious billionaire Sanjay Masrani, the founder of Masrani Global, as well as old friend to InGen's chief executive officer, John Hammond. Now, after the events of The Lost World, Mr. Hammond's health would begin to deteriorate rapidly, and before he died, he actually entrusted his company to that of his good friend's son. Simon promised his family friend that he would make his dream a living reality one day, as it was what John Hammond wished for more than anything in his last few moments before death. Only a few years after this, Simon would announce his plans to open a fully functional theme park on Isla Nublar. His promise to the world would be that the park would be a safe and secure resort for every child and adult on the planet. Those words were followed by the reveal of the infamous viral marketing poster that read, "Jurassic World, Isla Nublar, Summer 2004. Every television, travel brochure, magazine, and bus would share this commercial all over the world in what would become a major hype for the realization of something truly extraordinary. Simon spent years preparing for his park's grand opening, creating his own construction company to pull off the huge job. However, no task was more important to the man than securing his tourist safety. Security would eventually fall to the hands of a private mercenary company after Masrani witnessed Vic Hoskins' swift capture of several pteranodons that had escaped Site B in 2001 in search of new nesting grounds. This team would later be sent on the grand mission of tranquilizing and containing Nublar's most vicious resident, the mighty Tyrannosaurus Rex that had been living on the island since the events of the original Jurassic Park's demise. Once the island was secure and safe, construction could begin, but there was still a great amount of work that they all needed to do. Simon held Hammond's love for his animals in high regard and vowed to help them live safely and in peace, no matter the cost. After the public's awareness of a second dinosaur island was revealed, several poaching vessels were spotted off of the island's coasts, putting this promise to the test and resulting in Masrani's choice to move any surviving animals from Isla Sorna to Isla Nublar. No one was really sure what exactly happened back in the day, but apparently a major population decrease worried the new owner for the safety of these animals. Coupled with the threat of poaching, the operation to ship as many dinosaurs from Site B to the newly constructed Jurassic World happened immediately. Some paleontologists believed that the issue rose from territorial disputes, while others believed that a disease could possibly be the reason. Some even thought that dinosaur behavior was a major factor that played into the deaths of many animals. Recent revelations linked to the corruption of the Gene Guard Act by members of Masrani Global confirm the true cause. The introduction of illegally cloned animals on the island in 1999 caused a profound impact on the ecosystem. The term chaos effect, coined by Dr. Ian Malcolm's book God Creates Dinosaurs, has since become the accepted term for describing the radical and unnatural changes that took place on Isla Sorna. So in 2004, Masrani chose to ferry any surviving animals to Nublar. Site B remains restricted and abandoned to this day. Masrani made sure that Jurassic World held a standard of safety and animal respect higher than any biological zoo or preserve on the face of the earth. Yet business dealings and corporate meetings kept his attention away from the terrible corruption that infected his company. These issues still persist to this very day, seeing as the current company has chosen to abandon its past ethical responsibilities for the lives of these endangered animals, and has instead chosen to sit idly by and do nothing while the dinosaurs' lives remain at critical risk. Had it not been for the catastrophic events that overtook the island in 2015, it is undoubtedly believed that Simon Masrani would never let these animals be eradicated in the face of such imminent danger. Masrani cared deeply for the idea and held respect for what the Jurassic experience stood for. He even bought a rival company by the name of Tatsuo in 2011, which later went on to manufacture a device that could decode any extinct creature's genome in under an hour. He would name this modern marvel after its true father and ambitious creator, calling it the Hammond XB20. It's hard to say what the future of Masrani Global will look like now that Nublar's volcano has roared back to life and the animal's safety is in serious jeopardy. But everyone knows that had the company's owner not died in that terrible helicopter crash, many things would be working quite differently today. I don't know about you guys, but I think that this was a pretty significant information dump. I loved the references to Klayton's second novel with all of the theorizing going into what happened to Site B, and really enjoyed the line that held Malcolm's chaos effect term. That was something that I never thought I'd read within an actual piece of Jurassic Park canon. This may even give us a definite birth date for the Spinosaurus, as the year 1999 was used to reference the illegal engineering's creation. All in all, I really enjoyed reading through this article and thought it was a lot of fun to go over. The article is titled The Importance of Paleo-vets. Zia Rodriguez, a paleo-vet herself, happens to be the one that penned this new write-up. The first thing we see in this reveal is a wounded Suchomimus who appears to be crippled with terrible cuts and sores around its feet. Rexy the Tyrannosaurus appears to be looking on, possibly thinking about how this wounded dinosaur could make for a nice free meal. Now, if we actually go over the article itself, we find out that Jurassic World had a massive assortment of doctors assist the dinosaurs on a regular basis. 40 veterinarians and 25 scientists would all see to the dinosaurs during their weekly health checkups that covered both their physical and mental well-beings. While this sounds incredibly thorough and like nothing but good news at a glance, there happens to be a reason all of that was going on if you dig a little deeper. Now, we all know that in order for InGen to bring these dinosaurs back to life, they had to fill in the holes of their genetic code with DNA of other animals. This got the desired result of bringing the animals back to life, but it unfortunately also bore an unforeseen side effect. The advanced genetic makeup and incubation phases of their life cycles had left many of them to suffer from a muted immune response. This is why so many doctors were needed to keep away the inevitable diseases that would attempt to plague the beasts. In the first Jurassic Park, a sort of unexplained moment of sickness for one of the brachiosaurs starts to make a lot more sense now. In fact, that animal's cold is even listed as one of the things that the Jurassic World vets would try to keep at bay. Isla Sorna more than likely had an awful lot of diseased and sickly dinosaurs walking about as well, due to the lack in proper care that these animals would require. Of course, the workers would introduce them into the wild earlier on, which could make their immune systems a bit stronger if one knows the backstory of the Lost World's dinosaurs, so that's still up in the air. But on Nublar, illnesses like osteomyelitis appearing in the Parasaurolophus cranial horns and a distinct fungal infection that would creep into the folds of Dilophosaur neck frills would require constant care and concern from Jurassic World staff. And now that no one is on the island looking after the dinosaurs, it's presumed that many of them are undoubtedly sick. This could actually be one of the primary reasons some of the animals have already fallen back into extinction, and could even give us an idea of what may happen in the 6th Jurassic Park film, if my guess is correct. In my opinion, the final Jurassic movie will more than likely attempt to adapt Michael Crichton's DX disease to the big screen to wrap the plot up and give us an ending that would feel like the closure the novels had. However, instead of this disease being born of prions and sheep's meat like it was in the book, it will probably have a lot to do with this bad immune system that the animals have been genetically cursed with. This could also be the reason as to why the Indoraptor is said to be sickly and has a decaying look and feel to it. Again, this would echo the descriptions Crichton used for the dinosaurs in the novels, where he would write in detail on how the animals smelled like rotting corpses whenever they popped up. Bumblefoot is said to be a major issue for dinos that don't keep their hygiene as cleanly as they should, which looks to be what's actually ailing this Suchomimus in the earlier picture. Ragged Tooth is also a major issue for carnivorous animals that break their teeth on hunts, and take a look at this image of the Rex, by the way. Remind you of anything? Bracken fern poisoning, hookworms, ticks, and even rabies are said to be valid concerns for many on the outside looking in. If you ask me, it looks like most of these dinosaurs on the doomed Isla Nublar are probably going to be in a pretty bad shape. And once they get out on the mainland, they could be in for a very nasty surprise in the wilds of our world. These are all just my thoughts and opinions though, and just what I personally think. Now, I'm curious to hear what all of your opinions are on this new information. Do you think it will play a major role in Fallen Kingdom, or do you think we may see this in a future Jurassic World, or better yet, Jurassic World Evolution? Let me know in the comments down below, guys. This info seems pretty intriguing. This particular write-up, titled Saving the Carnivores on Isla Nublar, has a lot of new lore that I think is pretty important. Now, if we get down to the heart of this article, we'll find a lot of new information on one of the biggest questions that people have asked themselves for the last couple of years. How exactly did the Tyrannosaurus on Isla Nublar survive after the events of Jurassic Park? I did a video on this myself around 9 months ago, and it looks like the truth is a bit different from what I'd initially theorized. Here, we learn that the Tyrannosaurus Rex was first introduced to Nublar in 1989 after having spent the first year of her life on Isla Sorna in a small enclosure with other members of her species. Originally, the Tyrannosaur paddock in Jurassic Park was meant to hold one other T-Rex besides Rexy, but it turns out that she was the only one moved in before the island fell into chaos, after which she was undoubtedly the apex predator on Nublar, with no serious challengers in sight to even bother with. And being a massive predator of her size, she of course would have have to have a large amount of meat to survive day by day. We learn that the Rex had successfully managed to hunt down parasaurs, gallimimus, and oddly enough, a herd of goats that had been abandoned on the island by InGen for a good 9 years. In 2002, her reign over the island would of course come to an end once Vic Hoskins and some other InGen mercenaries successfully tranquilized her for construction of Jurassic World to begin. Upon sedation, it would appear that these last few years hadn't exactly been easy for the carnivore to live through. The Jurassic Park T-Rex was unfortunately suffering from a nasty case of ragged tooth and slight malnutrition before its recapture was carried out. This seems to be far more believable to me than just simply stating that the Rex was an unbeatable monster that conquered every aspect of its life with ease. Here, I honestly believe that the dinosaur survived by working hard to hunt and forage for its needs on a daily basis, which is what all real animals do in the wild. Unfortunately for her, the current state of Isla Nublar is nowhere near as easy to traverse. In the 90s, this dinosaur had absolutely no competition on the island and still struggled with some illnesses due to natural causes. Now, there are a lot more predators running around than what there used to be. With new animals like the Carnotaurus, Baryonyx, Allosaurs, and Pteranodons, this animal would have serious competition from other predators, all fighting for their own right to hunt in the shadow of Mount Sibo. Most of these animals came from Masrani shipping of Site B dinos to the JP Island. But Sorna happens to be far larger than Nublar, and here in their new wild homes, they would undoubtedly have to face the wrath of the island's resident T-Rex, and conflict would inevitably ensue. Some of the species have already begun to fall back into extinction, like the Metriacanthosaurus, who just couldn't compete with Rexy and the other carnivores on the island. Personally, I find all of this information to be quite interesting and something that I really hope we can see expanded upon further in some sort of medium. I initially thought that the Tyrannosaur was born in 1990, but new info, like this very article, state that she was born 2 years prior in 1988. This would make the Jurassic Park Rex one of the first dinosaurs successfully cloned by InGen, considering their first was a Triceratops in 1986. Anyway, I want to know what all of you guys think about Rexy's survival after Jurassic Park. Do you think we'll ever get to see the island in its ruined state during the later years of the 90s, or do you think that this is the best we're gonna get? I'd love to see what the island was like around the time of The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, guys. I want to know what you all have to say. Scientific research around predatory dinosaurs is commonplace in the Jurassic Park universe. We know that many of these animals are intelligent and delicately care for their young, similar to crocodiles. This can be witnessed during the events of The Lost World with the Tyrannosaur family. Unfortunately, it would appear as if there's been a rallying movement against these carnivorous creatures because of what happened in 2015 with the flying reptiles. The uncharacteristically aggressive attitude that these creatures displayed against humans in Jurassic World really sent a few over the edge. However, paleontologists and animal behaviorists agree that these pterosaurs would never display such aggression in the wild. Millions of years ago, they lived along the shorelines of oceans hunting large fish and little dinosaurs, and their lives in Jurassic World were actually far different. It's believed that the reason these creatures attacked the park guests with such ferocity was due to the lack in care for these animals and the proper enclosure they should have been housed in. The aviary that they were left in was definitely not tailored to these animals' needs. The body of water that was accessible to them was far too small for such a large population, and the food that was supplied for them deprived them of the much-needed exercise that is gained from hunting in open spaces. This is what ultimately led to the attack. As soon as the pteranodons and dimorphodons were free, they instinctually flocked towards the biggest source of water they could in order to collect food and nest. And can you imagine how amazing the Jurassic World Lagoon must have looked to them, especially after their immediate break for freedom? This tragic development cannot be blamed on the predatory animals being overtly aggressive, though, and should instead be accurately addressed as a problem caused by the lack of human research and empathy, which has sadly led to widespread negative sentiment towards these carnivores. For this reason, the Dinosaur Protection Group has made it their mission to provide adequate help and shelter for all surviving animals on Isla Nublar. These pterosaurs and other predators that they share the island with are believed to have just as much a right to exist as the peaceful herbivores. Personally, I find this Dinosaur Protection Group revelation to be quite interesting, seeing as it provides us with yet another major flaw that was just waiting to go wrong in the park. And with the design of the Jurassic World aviary being somewhat akin to that of the birdcage from JP3, I'm sure a similar situation played out on Site B, with that genetic group of pteranodons living in isolation. If the lives of the animals that lived within an aviary that was provided constant maintenance was so terrible, I can only imagine how grim that variation of the species must have had it on Sorna. Their enclosure was locked for several years, trapping the animals inside with no evident way out. Fish would more than likely be their primary food source, but even that seems like it would be in short supply, considering the restrictive flow of the river. This could possibly explain why these pteranodons were so aggressive once Alan Grant and the others ventured into their territory. Anyways guys, those are all just my thoughts on this new information. I'm interested to hear what all of you think about this particular article. Are you of the opinion that the pteranodons are just vicious beasts no matter what their living situations are? Or do you think that man played a part in the tragic event of 2015? Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below. I wanted to talk about something that I don't think too many people really know about. Back when Fallen Kingdom came out, there was a lot of material being released to support the new movie. We got new video games like Jurassic World Alive and Jurassic World Evolution, along with a canon novel tie-in called The Evolution of Claire. Now, I'm going to assume that the majority of you are well aware of all of that stuff, because it was in the public eye for a good amount of time last year. That being said, there was this one video game that didn't really make as big of an impact that I personally think it should have. And that video game is Jurassic World Blue. Basically, it was a brief VR experience made exclusively for the Oculus Rift that featured an immersive Jurassic World trip to Isla Nublar. In it, you'd get to watch Blue wander around the island and bump into a few of the other dinosaurs, while Mount Sibo roared angrily in the background. Well, in the second and final chapter of the game, we happen to get a pretty cool sequence where the Velociraptor would accidentally stumble upon a baryonyx nest. This clutch of eggs was sat resting at the base of the violent volcano, and after a brief disagreement with the egg's mother, both of the dinosaurs would soon be interrupted by the thundering roar of Nublar's Tyrannosaur. What results is a pretty brutal throwdown from the Rex when it knocks the berry's body across the screen. She lands with a serious thud, and apparently you can hear bones breaking once it hits the ground. After that happens, Blue actually jumps onto Rexy and starts biting into her neck in a similar way to what the final raptor did in the original Jurassic Park movie. This altercation doesn't last too long though, because the T-Rex slings Blue off of its back like 3 seconds later. In fact, the Rex roars angrily at the raptor just before it makes its way towards her. But just before she can make a quick snack out of Blue, helicopters can be heard hovering over their heads, in a manner that's really similar to the Lost World, by the way. Anyways, this bit of human activity makes the Rex reconsider her counterattack. She ends up walking away and actually passes the destroyed wreckage of Jeep 18, which was one of the vehicles that we actually saw meet the Brachiosaur in the first film. Meanwhile, Blue is carefully hiding behind a volcanic rock, waiting for the humans to pass overhead. Like I said before, this entire attack sequence that takes place directly before the events of Fallen Kingdom is a video game that I don't really think too many people know about. And I think a lot of that has to do with the Oculus Rift not being something in common households just yet. When I took a trip to London in order to see Fallen Kingdom, they had this massive VR experience inside of a box where they sat people down and let them view the first chapter. I got to see that and had a lot of fun with it. But what I really would have liked to have seen is all of this stuff going on right here. I mean, there are a lot of fans out there who have theories on Blue the Velociraptor and Rexy, I still don't like that name, being good friends on the island after their battle with the Indominus. But this fight kind of kills that entire train of thought and stops it dead in its tracks. At the end of Jurassic World, the T-Rex is really beaten up. If you look at her body, she's covered in blood, has a crippled arm, and walks away limping after looking at the Velociraptor. Attempting to eat the smaller dinosaur right now won't exactly replenish her health like a video game, if you know what I mean. The reason these dinosaurs don't mindlessly attack each other after the fight always registered in my mind as a battle that simply wouldn't be worth it. The threat was eliminated, and now there's not too much else to really do here. However, the altercation that takes place in this VR game happens under far different circumstances. And from my understanding, it's actually straight up canon, which makes a lot of sense because there's not really anything out there that would contradict it. At the end of the day, Blue attacked the Tyrannosaur because she felt threatened. These are animals after all, and after watching the baryonyx eat dirt, I'm sure she felt like she'd have to defend herself in this situation. By the way, I don't think that Barry was able to brush that hit off. In fact, she doesn't move after you hear her bones snap from the fall. I kind of think she might have died. But anyways, all of this stuff went down in the VR game Jurassic World Blue. It's canon, it's immersive, and although I've never played this specific chapter, I think it still looks really cool despite the odd floaty physics of the baryonyx flying through the air. Now before I go, I want to thank everyone that's helped me build my channel over the years. I'd also like to thank every one of you guys who've watched my stuff. You've all been extremely cool to me. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a like and hope that you'll consider subscribing. God bless you all, Christ is King, see you guys in the next video, and as always, take it easy.